Ish got 1,000 players to simulate civilization, and I chose to join the largest nation on the server, the snow state of Aculon, led by my friend Elanuelo. Aculon promised a world of great accomplishments, a family that would reach new heights together, and safety from the worst of the world, since I only had one life, and if I died, I was dead for good. But as time went on, I began to uncover the dark underside of Aculon and its secrets, which would set me on a path to reduce the place I once considered home to nothing more than ashes. This is that story. The first day started, and I logged on, optimistic and full of dreams, all ready to be crushed by the bleak frozen landscape I had been dropped in. The first step was to meet up with the rest of my cohort. You see, Aculon had over 200 players in it, and being made up of a fifth of the server, the nation was so ridiculously massive that it was necessary to break the members up into sub-teams, known as cohorts. I was placed in Cohort Charlie, who I affectionately nicknamed the Chuckies. Our cohort's leader, or Baron, was my friend Lord Bernie, who had chosen me to be the Lord, his second in command. Our first day was spent mining for materials and getting to know each other.
The children yearn for the mines.
The children. Yes.
British moment.
I finally found one piece of iron.
One
It's
Piece.
one piece. Yeah, shut up.
Oh my
Favorite
god,
beer.
I'm caught up on One Piece. I'm gonna make a snow hut.
An igloo?
No, a snow hut. It's different than an igloo.
okay,
A snow
okay.
hut is square, an igloo is round.
Your mom is square.
Stop talking.
A snut.
A smut?
Smut is something else. A snut is completely innocent.
I'm gonna put a sign that says smut. Snow snut.
I had only known most of these players for a day, but I already considered them family, and would be more than willing to take a creeper blast for them. I'd found a place to belong in Aculon with my new friends, and losing them would be unthinkable. The unthinkable happened. Rubbish Not Trash, one of our cohort members, fell to her death while working on a mob spawner. This loss hit Charlie pretty hard.
Rubbish was our friend.
While consoling each other, a member of the Aculon higher-ups entered our VC and expressed their condolences.
I'm sorry for your loss.
No.
Thank you for your service to
Rubbish.
Aculon.
Something about their message seemed off to me. The message seemed so cold, so impersonal. It was as if Rubbish wasn't a player with dreams and goals of her own, but rather a cog in the machine, a pawn in Elanuelo's greater plan. The Chuckies continued mining and gathering materials, but there was some seed of doubt planted in my mind. It was probably nothing. As day 3 dawned, a freakin' turkey, who was acting Emperor of Aculon until Elanuelo was able to log on, told us that Cohort Charlie would be merging with Cohort Mikey, due to the amount of players Cohort Mikey had lost on the first 2 days. This sat just fine with me. As far as I was concerned, a bigger cohort just meant a bigger family. While most of day 3 was spent continuing to mine and gather gear, halfway through the day, one of our cohort members, Ika, logged on for the first time and was stuck in the middle of the snow wilds. The Baron of Cohort Mikey, Zoffers, joined me as we went on a rescue mission to save Ika from the freezing wastes. On our way to her coordinates, I stumbled across another nation, a small faction that had named itself Cooler Canada. I didn't spend long there, but they were friendly, and I began to realize that although Aculon was the largest faction on the server, there were dozens and dozens of other small nations that were all building their own histories and telling their own stories. This gave me an idea, so after getting Ika safely back to Aculon, I went to the head architect and asked him if there was a free lot for me to build something. In preparation, I began to gather materials, and the day came to an end. The next day was, conveniently, declared by Ish to be an extra long build day, so I wasted no time in making my idea a reality. I cleared the lot of snow to build a library, a place where I could collect the stories and histories of the many nations on the server. I felt like all the different factions and nations deserved a chance to tell their stories, and I would provide a place for them to do that. After my modest little library was finished, there was still a decent amount of time left in the day, so I joined the rest of the Aculon builders in constructing the majestic centerpiece of the city, the Elanuelo. The Elanuelo would be the ceremonial heart of the nation, where Elanuelo would watch over his empire. It was the main goal of the Aculon builders, and when finished, would be the pride and joy of every citizen, the jewel of the Aculon Empire. It was only fitting then that halfway through the blossoming of the Elanuelo, there was another thing budding, the love between the soon-to-be married couple of President Steve and iPixel. As the wedding music began to play, the two joined each other at the altar. It was beautiful, and everything was going perfectly. Well... It was a nice moment for the nation to come together and celebrate as one, although little did we know, it may have been our last. Day 5 should have been calm. It was a normal workday. Construction on the castle continued, resource teams resumed gathering materials, and a conspiracy was uncovered. The Aculon Knights, an elite enforcement strike team consisting of god-tier PvPers, found one of the workers in the Quartermaster building where Aculon kept all of its supplies and valuables was a spy for one of the smaller snow nations on the island. This spy was swiftly removed by the Knights, but Elanuelo was still uneasy. Growing slightly more paranoid, Elanuelo posted this message in the Aculon Discord. I have a word for all traitors and spies. We know who you are. We have a long list of foreign spies and internal traitors trying to take down Aculon. We have eyes and ears everywhere. We see everything. If you leave now, we'll spare your life. However, if not, you will suffer a swift death at the hands of our knights. Think carefully. Your life depends on it. This made me slightly uncomfortable. What if the list was wrong? What if in trying to remove spies, the knights killed innocent citizens? Apparently, I wasn't the only one to have my doubts about the Aculon leadership, because Baron Bernie approached me and told me about a secret plan. Bernie, and as it turns out, various other members of Aculon, felt uneasy about the way Elanuelo was leading the nation. Citizens were treated less and less like players and more like worker drones in building some massive Aculon hive. Individual builds suffered while the Emperor commissioned builds like the castle drained most of the nation's resources. The recent threat Elanuelo posted was simply adding to the pile of his transgressions, which was even concerning the Crown Prince of Aculon, its Ender, who was also on the plan to flee the nation. I was conflicted. Bernie was like family to me now, but at the same time it didn't feel right to just pick up and leave my home. Bernie told me I'd have some time to think about it, as the escape wasn't set in stone, but rather just an option they were considering. Like it or not, I was now wrapped up in this conspiracy to abandon Aculon, and I'd have to make my choice sooner or later. Today was a big day for Aculon. It would be the first day Elanuelo would be able to log on to the server, the day our Emperor would finally arrive in his land. As such, a coronation ceremony was planned with all of Aculon in attendance. The barons of each cohort would present Elanuelo with a gift, and since Bernie wasn't able to log on, as the Lord of Cohort Charlie, I was to stand in his place. I prepared the royal beans, donned my fanciest suit, and the coronation ceremony began. Elanuelo was in complete control. On day 7, the borders between the islands finally dropped, and I decided it was time to make my dreams of telling other nations' stories a reality. So, admittedly, without any permission whatsoever, I took some of Cohort Charlie and off we sailed. The first place we landed was the Central Island, known as Dead Island. It was named this because of the dead trees that populated the island, and the abandoned town at the very center of the island. Dead Island was still somewhat of a poorly fitting name, as flowers of every kind covered the landscape. We didn't stay at Dead Island for too long, however, as our intended destination was the Sultanate, the biggest and most powerful nation on the desert island. since I had a friend there who could show us around. After landing on the desert island, we stumbled across a nation called Homestead, a small country with about 10 members. The Homesteaders had built a massive lava-cast wall around their base, and within, there were fires representing the lives of each of the members. When a member died, that fire was then extinguished. It was a small but touching way to honor fallen friends. Again, we didn't stay too long in Homestead, as we wanted to make it to the Sultanate before the day ended. And when we finally got there... oh boy. The Sultanate knew it was one of the major powerhouses of the server, and had shown up to back up that claim. Storming hell, the Sultan of the nation was in the process of building not just one, but 2 mega-builds. The Sultan's palace and Grand Mosque were still under construction, but their outlines stretched to the clouds, and made the Alani hold look small in comparison. The Sultanate was truly a glorious nation to behold, but we might have picked the wrong time to visit it. The Sultan had been assassinated by his own right-hand man, and here we were, foreigners, standing right in the middle of what seemed to be the eye of the political storm. Fortunately, the locals were understanding that we weren't involved, but still suggested that we be elsewhere. Eager to avoid escalating this to an international crisis, us Chuckies agreed and hightailed it out of the desert into the Plains Island. We landed at Stoneport, a small coastal village that was more than happy to welcome us in and give us a refuge as the day came to a close. On days 8 and 9, I was unable to log on, but the server did not wait for me. Today was the day that Baron Bernie, Crown Prince Ender, and ex-acting Emperor Turkey, as well as a few other Aculon barons, finally intended to talk to Elanuelo about some things that needed to change. See, President Steve, the groom from the wedding on day 4, was going to be unable to log on for the rest of the experiment, effectively meaning he was dying. As such, a memorial service was held, in which President Steve gave his hard-earned diamond gear to his soon-to-be widowed wife Pixel. This was already a tragic loss for Pixel, but it was only made worse when, after Steve had logged off, the general of the Aculon Knights, Too True, demanded that Pixel hand over Steve's armor so that it could be redistributed to knights and Aculon higher-ups that still needed diamond armor. No matter how you spin it, robbing a widow is always going to look bad.
Bro, you stole
the armor, basically.
You will have it.
For Bernie, Ender, and the other dissidents, this was the straw that broke the camel's back. Bernie and Ender were joined by Turkey and a few other concerned Aculon barons and went to Elanuelo to try and talk some sense into him. But, in a fit of intense paranoia, Elanuelo ordered his knights to attack. Ender and a few of the barons managed to escape, and alongside those who had been in on the secret plan to escape Aculon, they fled to the jungle, where they were taken in by a jungle nation known as Seth's Citadel. And there I was, unable to log on while being fed news of a violent massacre of peaceful dissidents. I made up my mind then and there. All we had wanted as Aculon citizens was freedom and safety. All I had wanted was to become an adventuring librarian, but Bernie's death forced my hand. It may be true that the pen is mightier than the sword, but Elanuelo was about to find out just how deadly I can be with both. Day 9 was declared by Ish to be a peaceful day of preparations, the calm before the storm. Both Aculon and us Aculon deserters, who had named ourselves the Bastion of Peace, were drawing more and more of the various nations on the server into the impending war. While these alliances were being drawn, I kept busy on Discord, reaching out to various friends in different nations to try and create alliances, and reaching out to friends who had remained in Aculon to try and get intel on what Aculon's defenses looked like. The biggest deal I struck for the Bastion of Peace was the alliance with Zamta and his followers. While Zamta was the Sultan's right-hand man turned assassin, his PvP skills would be invaluable against the Aculon Knights. He might not have been the most honorable ally, but I would do what I had to do to end Aculon's tyranny. I think this motivation, this drive, as well as all the effort I had put in, was why the leaders of Bastion of Peace decided to give me and a player called Melting responsibility for coordinating the spies and saboteurs we had placed in Aculon. This was a big responsibility, as spies were a central part of our strategy. Outmanned, outgeared, and outskilled, the Bastion of Peace and its allies would still have to storm the impeccably engineered defensive stronghold of Aculon, the Iron Torch. An inside job was the only way we could hope to win. The day of the final showdown had arrived. The Bastion of Peace, Seth Citadel, Pandaris, United Plains State, and our other allies all rallied forces on Dead Island. I was a little tense upon arrival, but when I saw our forces assembled, my heart soared. The assembled forces of all the nations were more than I could have ever hoped for. There were hundreds and hundreds of name tags ready to fight for the freedom of the server. Red from plains, green from jungle, yellow from desert, and even blue from snow. Preparations complete, we all headed to the beaches to set sail for the battle that would determine the future of the server. If Aculon won, it would mean the server, and all Minecraft servers to come, would be dominated by whichever faction could amass the most players, whichever one could most efficiently enforce strict rules and roles. But if the Bastion of Peace won, it meant that the server could be played the way it was meant to be, where players were free to create what they wanted, free to tell their own stories. Standing on the streets of Aculon, it was strange to be back in what I once considered my home. Stranger still to be standing against those that were once my neighbors. But if this was to be where my story ended, where better to end it than the place it began? As we charged the Iron Torch, I knew one way or another that the last chapter of my story with the Aculon Empire would be written today in blood. As we approached the base of the Iron Torch, the first problem we would face was how we would get to the defenders within. But it turns out the defenders would solve that problem for us. The Aculon Knights had been deployed on our flank to pick us off one by one. This was an effective strategy, but the Bastion of Peace quickly regrouped, and small battalions quickly responded, isolating the Knights and keeping them away from the main attacking force. I was in one of these battalions, kiting the Knights and keeping them busy while also trying to stay alive myself. Meanwhile, the siege on the Torch was slowly progressing. It was time to deploy our spies. But in a surprise counterintelligence move, one of our spies, Applewood, was secretly on the Aculon side the whole time and ratted out the rest of our spies. Or so he thought. One of the spies who I had never revealed, did best, turned out to be our Deus Ex Machina. Elanuelo, firing down upon the attackers from his perch in the Iron Torch, had overextended a bit too far, and DeBest was able to mine out the block from under him, and Elanuelo fell. With the fall of Elanuelo, the rest of Aculon quickly followed. The remaining knights ran from the scene of the fight, and the rest of the Aculon soldiers surrendered. We had done it. The Iron Torch had been extinguished, and a new era on the server had dawned. The last few days, the server shone with a new light. Sure, the occasional group of Aculon sympathizers would make a desperate attack once in a while, and the knights were yet to be captured and tried for their crimes. But no longer was the entire server in the shadow of the Aculon Empire. I, for one, was finally free to build a proper library at the Bastion of Peace, to tell the stories of the server, and as I worked, I was discovered by a player called Raminate. Ram was a fellow librarian, and joined me to help build the library. It turns out Ram had been a member of Tuituji, who had fought alongside Aculon in the war. Yet here we were, once enemies, working side by side to build something greater for the server. This was what I had fought for. A world where people were free to tell their stories, where people could decide what they wanted to be, who they wanted to be, and where people could live side by side, and the greatest things came not from all the players being forced to work as one whole, but where individuals' dreams came together to create a better, more vibrant world. This was what I had fought for. A happy ending.